prominent guest. I think you should re-enter the screen in a moment. It's Ivan Miklos, who is, yes, very good. You are back here. Very good, Ivan. Thanks a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah.
Mr. Miklos is a very prominent European economic reformer, the father and implementer of the flat tax in the Slovak Republic, the man who was reforming his country, the Slovak Republic, like nobody else, and has transformed it into a very successful country economic magnet for FDI, has led his country, prepared it also for the Eurozone, and has achieved a lot of things, has also helped to reform Ukraine, Moldova, and many other countries, and is a very important European personality. I'm very happy, Ivan, Mr. Miklos, that you are here with us. Maybe you want to start with a short introduction for our international audience, and then we discuss about European economic reform. Thanks a lot, Ivan, again for joining the Günther Fehlinger podcast. You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Günther. First, I'm not sure if it is recorded because I have here some sign.
Yes, it's fine. It's fine. You are live
It's fine
already on X and on.
Okay.
We are actually, you can follow it later, share it. We are on all platforms live, and it's a wonderful tool. Riverside, I make some advertisement now for that one. I can broadcast simultaneously to Facebook, to YouTube, and to X, and I will upload it on TikTok and on Instagram afterwards in this afternoon. And you are very welcome.
Okay, thank you, Günther. Thank you for inviting me to say a few words about me. I spent some time in Slovakian governments. I was 4 times in Slovakian government as Minister of Privatization, Minister of Finance, Deputy Prime Minister, and we did some reforms, especially in two Dzurinda's governments from 98 to 2006, which have been also internationally recognized. And then I spent also about 5 years in Ukraine, advising the Ukrainian ministers and prime ministers between 2015 and 2020. And then I spent also some time in Moldova, advising Moldovan Prime Minister Natalia Gavrilita. Which means I have some experience from doing reforms, especially in post-communist countries, usually structural reforms. One of the most important, well-known reform was tax reform during second Dzurinda's government, but also I coordinated also other reforms like social system reform, public finance reform, fiscal decentralization, pension reform, and other structural reforms.
Ivan, you are very modest in saying that you helped. You are basically the father of the flat tax movement. Because of you, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, many other countries have really performed so excellently the last 20 years. And you can oversee basically the economic reform debate of the last 25 years. We are head of the European Council. And again, we are talking about this is the European moment. It's the time to wake up. We are under immense pressure, competitive-wise, and of course from the Russian aggression against Ukraine and all of us. What's your advice to the current political leaders assembling later this week in Brussels, in Belgium, at this famous castle, to really reform the European Union? What needs to be done today?
Yeah, I think the most important thing which is necessary to do is to be really united and politically united in doing necessary changes, to have much stronger voice, one voice of Europe and European Union as the most important part of Europe, but of course in cooperation with UK, Norway, which means the most important, because we know what is necessary to do. It was a Letta report, Draghi report, which again reminded us what is necessary to do. But the most important is how to find political will to do this. And I think in this regard, in this current new global and geopolitical situation, which is really changing, which the old system based on World War II development is really changing. It is even not only more important, but even acute to have a stronger voice of Europe in international politics, in geopolitics. In sustaining, I mean, the most important is to sustain as much as possible from the international order, which was based not only on interests and power, but also on values, especially the same rights of all countries, despite of the size of the country. And European Union is very good example of the union which is built on this principle and on these values. And I think now what is the most important, because all these economic challenges which are in front of us, which have been very exactly defined by Draghi report last time, which means that we need a real single market, which still we don't have, that we need more investment, that we need more innovation, we need less bureaucracy. Everything this, to achieve everything this, it is necessary to have much stronger, let's say, kind of federalization, and not only of the European Union, and not only in the economic area, because it is simply impossible to divide some kind artificially divide economic agenda from the political agenda, which means now it is clear. And I think that the initiative EU6, which means initiative of Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Netherlands, and Poland in this regard is very important, because if they will show strong will to go together and to do what is necessary together, then of course other countries will follow them, because these 6 countries represent more than 70% of European GDP. And then of course it will be possible overcome the biggest obstacle, biggest bottleneck in doing these necessary European reforms, which is lack of political legitimacy, which is done by this, that still national identity is felt much stronger than common European identity, because Europe is the economic power, let's say, measuring by GDP, on the global GDP, measuring by consumption, huge market, 450 million people, but Europe doesn't have power, which could use and leverage, I mean, this economic power in the geopolitics. And to have this geopolitical power is really important, especially in today's changing world, which we all know what is the problem now.
Ivan, let me ask you, because you were very respectful to Mr. Letta and Mr. Draghi. They are, of course, very serious European leaders, but they're coming from a country like Italy, which in many ways is still a very unreformed economy, while you were, for example, reforming Slovakia from the post-communist transition, then a second time in the 2000 towards this tiger economy, which was really very attractive. Have you been consulted by the EU leadership how to reform countries? Because you really know how to do it. You actually achieved it. You have done these structural reforms in Slovakia, and you have helped later in Ukraine in these important things. So wouldn't it be much more meaningful for the European Union to have a real reformer like you on the leverages of this reform debate than Italian former prime ministers, with all respect to them?
No, I was not asked to participate on their reports, and this is maybe paradox, because not only Letta and Draghi, but first this kind of report was done under leadership of Monti, which was also Italian prime minister, which means 3 Italian prime ministers, which means, yeah, you are right, country which is not the best, let's say, modestly in doing reasonable economic policy. But it doesn't mean, that those economists and politicians and their reports are not correct, because sometimes also politicians who want to do what is necessary, but political circumstances don't allow them to do this, maybe can know even better than those who had also political possibility to do this reform. That the most important is not who did it, but if these reports correctly identified the problems. And I think these reports are correct in identifying what is necessary to do. But again, the most important problem, and this is my all life experience, is that the biggest challenge for doing reforms are not the technical challenges or technical questions, but the biggest challenge is political part of the job, which means how to have political power, will, courage, and ability finally to do what is necessary to do. Because problem is that every reform is politically difficult to impose or to implement, as we can see in any European country. And in this regard, yeah, that's true that post-communist countries have had maybe better chances to do this because they had to change system much more fundamentally than countries which had market economy even before. But I think the most important, as I said, is if the reports are correct, and I think they are correct.
Now we are under twin pressure from this Russian genocidal maniac Putin, who is attacking Ukraine now 4 years, and also Trump's bullying against Europe. What else we need as a kind of wake-up moment to crystallize the political will to really unite Europe and reform the long overdue structural issues, which we all know they exist since 25 years? What else we need in order to really do what is needed?
No, we need leadership. We need vision, will, and courage of politicians to do things despite the political risk connected with this. And in this regard, we are saying in Slovakia that everything bad is good for something. And of course, Trump's policy is disaster. It's disaster for world, for US itself, for international order, but it is good for wake up of Europe, wake up in all areas, of course, in defense and safety, but not only, also in necessity to be stronger player, I mean global player. Because as Finnish President Alexander Stubb named it, what we need is kind of pragmatic values or realism, which means to accept that world is changing, but to do as much as possible to sustain from this old international order as much as possible. But for that, we need to be strong, not only as consumption market, but also as strong global player. And in this regard, and Putin's war against Ukraine is another example why and how it is important that Europe is strong militarily, is strong economically, because this is of course very interconnected, why it is necessary to be strong economically, why it is necessary to increase competitiveness. To increase competitiveness means to do necessary reforms, which means in this regard it is clear. But still it is very big political challenge, of course, because as you know, especially in the biggest European countries, which means the most important countries, by public opinion polls, the leading position now have the parties which are, let's say, so-called anti-systemic. Yeah, look at Farage in the UK, AfD in Germany, National Front in France. But again, even here is finally Trump playing constructive for Europe, constructive and positive role, because his policy is such unacceptable that even those parties have to see and expressed explicitly that it is unacceptable what he's doing.
One of the big things the last 25 years, when you were constantly in power and many times in Slovakia, was the issue of trade relations with the other parts of the free world, especially with Mercosur and with India. Now suddenly, after such a long debate since the foundation of the World Trade Organization in 95, it was possible to conclude a free trade agreement with Mercosur and with India. Suddenly even Australia seems to be possible in March, and things are really on the move with Philippines and with Indonesia. Suddenly things are possible which never before seemed to be feasible. How do you see this? Is there progress on the free trade and opening of the European markets to the world markets?
Yeah, this is really important. And this is something what is at least partially compensating the Trump's trade wars, because fortunately, I mean Trump's policy of the tariffs and other measures and creating threats against allies is really unfortunate. But it is pushing not only Europe but also other countries to be active. And I think I don't know if this trade agreement with Mercosur and India could happen if not Trump's policy, which means again it is confirming that everything bad is good for something. And in these new circumstances, it will be very important that all countries which are, let's say, Western liberal democracies, which means European Union, Europe as whole, Western Central Europe, Canada, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, these countries, let's say global West, are cooperating as much as possible and are trying to cooperate as much as possible on the sustaining and even developing free trade with other countries of global South. And in this regard, I think it is we can see that because US are the strongest economy and strongest power in the world, but still share of US export on the global export is only 9%, and share of US import in global import is 13%, which means it is big but not decisive share, which means if others will cooperate more than it was before, then it could be compensated this let's say detrimental effect of the Trump's trade wars and mercantilistic economic policy, which is nonsense policy, which means in this regard, I think it is very important. Of course, specific issue and specific problem is China, because on one side, it is important to have, let's say, pragmatic relations with China, especially because Chinese position of China in the world economy, the global economy, is relevant, very relevant. On the other side, it is necessary to be very careful with China because China is also threat. I mean, especially geopolitical threat and for the future.
Mr. Miklos, you are most famous for the reform you did in 2003, I think, that you introduced a flat tax of 19%. And it has really changed your country. It has changed Central and Eastern Europe. But unfortunately, no Western European country has adopted a similar system. What's your recommendation now when we have Mr. Merz in power in Germany and there is a lot of debate now about how to be competitive? Should we also cut taxes similar like you did in Slovakia in 2003?
Yeah, it is another confirmation that reforms are more political challenge than technical, because technically it really worked, and which means it's not theory. We can see it on the figures, on the hard data, how it worked, and it worked really tremendously. It was much better than our best hopes have been at that time, which means it brought economic activity, it attracted investment, it created conditions for the highest economic growth in Europe, and so on and so on. And we collected with lower taxes much more revenues for the state budget as well. Also because reducing of tax evasion, but mainly because higher economic growth and so on and so on. Which means there is no doubt that it was very effective. Another important point is that it is not true that it was unjust, because some critics are saying that it was good for high income and not for low income. It is not true. The risk of poverty was decreased after implementing of this reform, and I can confirm it on strong data. But of course, problem is political, because politically it is very easy. And by the way, there is story about this with Germany. When we implemented this new tax system from the January 1st, 2004. In 2004, Angela Merkel, as at that time chairperson of opposition CDU, was in the visit of Slovakia. She met Prime Minister, she met me as Finance Minister. We had planned the meeting for 30 minutes. She spent 1.5 hours with me. She was very interesting about the details, and I explained everything, what we did, how we did, what are the results, and so on and so on. And she said that, wow, it is really interesting. And then in CDU, they at that time, Professor Kirchhoff was very well-known economic professor and very strong supporter of the flat tax. And after she returned in Germany, he was appointed as shadow minister of finance, and CDU put flat tax in their pre-election program. But SPD immediately started to criticize CDU and arguing that it is good just for the rich people, that it is against the poor people, that it is anti-social, and so on and so on, and preferences of CDU came down. And then CDU was afraid from this. They fired Kirchhoff and they removed flat tax proposal from their program. Which means it is illustrating that politically it is risky. What we did, for instance, in Slovakia, we didn't have my party, which was the strongest party then in the second Zurindas government. We didn't write for the pre-election program that we will impose flat tax. But what we wrote there, that we will really change the tax system in such a way that the new tax system will be simple, neutral, proactive, will create strong incentives for economic growth, and so on and so on. And then what we did after analyzing what is the best way, how to achieve these goals, was the flat tax. We implemented a flat tax. This is history, but what to do for future? I think it could be very good possibility now, because I'm not sure if it is politically possible to implement this model in Germany or in France. I'm afraid that not. But what should be possible, European Commission is now working on so-called 28th system, which will be system for the companies which can voluntarily use this system. And if companies are used this system of business regulation, tax administrative tax system, and so on and so on, if companies are implementing this 28th system, they will not obliged to use national systems. Even if it could be very attractive for the companies, especially middle-sized and quickly growing companies which want to do business in more European countries, and not to have 28 or 20 or how many countries they want to be involved, different systems, but to use one common system. And because this new 28th regulation system will be effective only if it will be attractive, if it will be better than national systems, and then companies will have real natural interest to use this system. And as more attractive this new regulation system will be, more companies will go there, and more quicker way of unification, I mean creation single market and deregulation and so on will be there. I don't know if this idea of flat tax is implemented there, but one of key person who is participating on the preparation is Ludovít Odor. Ludovít Odor is member of European Parliament from Slovakia. Ludo Odor was in 23. He was prime minister for a short time of this pay-carrying government. But when we did our tax reform, he was my advisor, and he was He was head of Institute for Financial Policy at the Ministry of Finance, which means he is very, very, very well informed and very good professional in this regard, in this area, which means I hope he will use his experience also in the creation of this 28th system.
So we could have the flat tax in via the back door of this new European company, which then is having a simplified, easy taxation system for all European investors who want to use that vehicle.
Yeah.
Mr. Miklos, now we have a different times because Mr. Trump has also done a tax reform in America where he has cut the corporate taxes to 21% in 2017. So my question is, because many of the Western European countries have now first time in history a much higher corporate tax rate, like Germany with 30%, for example, and there is now talk for cutting the corporate tax in Germany and other Western European countries. What is your thinking, given our lower productivity and lesser attractiveness to foreign capitals in the European Union? What is the optimal tax rate for corporate tax? Where should we be in the European Union on average? What's your recommendation for our corporate tax rates given the American competition?
Not only given American competition, but the problem of comparing tax rate is that just comparing tax rate doesn't speak anything, because we have to speak not only about tax rate but also about tax base. And problem of this tax system, like German system and other system, is that they have very high tax rate but very narrow tax base, which means a lot of exceptions, deductions, special rates, and then finally problem is that these kind of systems which high rate and narrow base are very anti-business and very complicated, which are offering a lot of possibilities for tax evasion and which are not, let's say, creating incentives for activity, for doing business, for investment, and so on, so on. Which means what we need, one of the most important principle in the for the creation of the effective tax system is to have as broader as possible tax base and as lower as possible tax rate, because then it is level playing field for everybody, and then it is attractive for, then it is improving business environment, there is pro-investment, there is pro-activity, this is reducing tax evasion, and so on and so on. Which means this is the problem, because just for illustration, I know that this what I will mention now, I remember from that time when we did reforms 22 years ago. At that time, when we implemented 19% flat tax, which means also 19% for corporate income tax, profit tax, at that time, overall rate in Germany was 38%. Yeah, which means 2 times higher. But as share of GDP, we collected much more. I don't remember now how much, but much more as share of GDP in Slovakia from that tax, as they collected in Germany with 2 times higher rate. But one of the reasons, there have been 2 reasons. One is that tax base was very narrow in Germany, and Slovakia tax base was very broad, because we cancelled almost every exception, deduction, special rates, and so on and so on. And then another reason was that if you have such a complicated system with narrow tax base and high tax rate, it is very high motivation to escape from tax paying, and also a lot of possibilities how to, through using these deductions, special regimes, special rates, escape from the taxation. Which means important is not only speak about tax rate, but also speak about tax base, and to have system which is simple, neutral, non-distortive as much as possible.
Mr. Miklos, you have led your nation into the European Union 22 years ago. And can you tell me how is basically Slovakia has developed very well with such a competitive tax system? Did you attract FDI? And how is Slovakian economy developing the last 22 years?
Yeah, but there are two very different questions because at that time when we did reforms, we have been one of the most successful reformers and also one of the most dynamic economies, growing economies. Slovakia at that time was labeled by World Bank as the most reform country in the world in 2004, and then we had the highest economic growth in Europe. In 2007 we have 8.5%, in 2006 8.4.5%, in 2007 even 11% economic growth. And at that time Slovakia did the biggest convergence jump by this very high economic growth, which means part of the story is this big success. Slovakia had at that time this nickname Tatra Tiger, but unfortunately from 2006, we had now we have fourth government of Robert Fico, simply politician and political party which is incompetent, irresponsible, corrupted, which is doing no reforms, and Slovakia is falling down and behind more and more and more, which means as we have been one of the most successful economic reformer and economy at that time, now we are one of the worst, I mean lagging behind every ranking and rating regarding business environment, innovation activity, productivity, GDP per capita, economic growth, anything what you are looking at, which means now unfortunately we are we see the opposite development. And it is clear now that also that this government, you know, it is from that time, it is now just exactly 20 years. During these 20 years, 15 years have been in power governments of Robert Fico. And now it is simply clear that they don't have any will, but also knowledge how to do, how to really manage the country, how to do reforms, because they never did it. And now it is clear that necessary precondition for change is political change, which means hopefully political change will come at the latest in 2 years from now, when we will have elections, and then also it is chance for change of economic policy and also to solving all these accumulated problems.
One of the key supporters of Mr. Fico, who is really very unpopular in Austria and everywhere in the free world for his pro-Russian stance, one of the key supporters is, of course, Viktor Orban in Hungary, who hopefully will lose elections now in April. And the hope is that there will be no longer any Hungarian support for Mr. Fico, and he will be isolated and hopefully lose the elections. What's your prediction on that scenario?
Yeah, polls are very, I mean, optimistic in this regard, but we will see. We will see, because the problem of Hungary is that, yeah, maybe Orban will lose power, but he had 16 years from 2010 constitutional majority in Hungary, and he really used and misused sometimes this constitutional majority for taking control over every possible institution which has to be independent, which means if there are media, not only public media, but even private media, judiciary system, prosecution, everything, yeah? Which means in this regard it will be questioned, even if even in case of political change, new power will be able to return Hungary to the normal track, let's say, in this regard. Which means it will be challenge, but we will see. But yeah, the situation looks hopeful.
You have been also key to prepare your country for the Eurozone membership. I think it was in 2008, and when Slovakia, as one of the few countries in Eastern Europe, in Central Europe, has joined the Eurozone. And now we have also Bulgaria at the beginning of 2026. but unfortunately Hungary, Czech Republic, Poland, Romania, they are all still not in the Eurozone. How do you see that? Wouldn't it be much better if we have faster accession to the Eurozone, more unity, more convergent? And how was the Slovakian experience in the Euro?
Yeah, I think our case is evidence of success, and I think even among public, majority of people is supporting our Eurozone membership. Yeah, we entered from January 1st, 2009. Eurozone, but all this preparation work have been done, or majority of the preparation work have been done during second Zorinda's government, when we have been in the government. Why other countries are still not? There are different reasons for this. Surely it was also a Eurozone crisis, Greek crisis at that time, which was the reason why some countries have been more cautious in this regard. But for future, I think in reality, whole monetary union and Europe project proved itself to be successful, which means I think that I hope that also other countries will enter, and especially Poland will be very important in this regard, because Poland is only one among these EU6 new informal coalition of strongest countries, which is not in the Eurozone.
When it comes to Romania, they really want to join, but they have some inflation issues and some debt issue. Do you think we should make some effort to speed up Romanian's Eurozone accession, or should we be very strict with the compliance to the criteria which France, Italy, Belgium, Austria, I think only Germany is fulfilling the criteria of the Eurozone Maastricht at the moment, and nobody else, or very few countries. Should we not make a political move towards, for example, allow Romania into Eurozone with a little bit of maybe not fulfilling all criteria, but it would be extremely meaningful for the unity of Europe?
I don't think that it is necessary to softening the conditions. You know, Romania is successful economically. Economic development in Romania is success story, which means they have all preconditions and ability to fulfill also criteria in inflation and other criteria. And membership of Romania is not so decisively important if it is there 1 or 2 years sooner or later. It is not, I mean, decisive.
What is decisive is, of course, Ukraine, and you worked many years for the Ukrainian government. There's a lot of debate that Ukraine is a very corrupt country and will never work and is a big burden, while at the moment now the European Union seems to have decided that Ukraine shall be fast accelerated into the European Union. Debate this weekend as well in the media and worldwide is that Ursula von der Leyen is planning to have a special status for Ukraine inside the European Union already in 2026. You have been working in the Ministry of Finance, advising, stabilizing Ukraine for 4 or 5 years. Can you give your take what's going on in Ukraine with regards to reconstruction, also the war, and of course the future in the European Union?
I'm very strong supporter of Ukraine, not only because they have been really bravely fighting against the aggressor, Putin's regime, but also what they achieved in economic area. Because yeah, that's true that regarding corruption, for instance, that's true that till 2014, Ukraine was really very corrupted country in all levels. It was systemic corruption there. But at the same time, it is true that from that time, which means now we are speaking about 12 years from 2014, Ukraine did a lot in the fighting against corruption and in the reducing space for corruption. And that's true, which means the most important areas, success areas in this regard have been economic reforms. For instance, deregulation of the price for an increasing price for gas, because heavily regulated price for gas for households have been one of the biggest source of corruption. Another huge corruption source was banking system. Ukraine really restructured banking system. 100 banks have been closed. The biggest bank have been nationalized and cleaned. and now banking sector is no more a source of corruption. On the contrary, is working very effectively and very professionally. And another reasons, tax system, VAT, and other areas, which means space for corruption in Ukraine was reduced significantly. Of course, still corruption exists. Corruption exists in every country, but very good example is also this last scandal with Mindic, who was a guy who was very closely connected with President Zelensky. But despite of this, independent anti-corruption investigation institutions and enforcement institutions finally have been investigating him and finally accused him and his allies, and he escaped from the country, he left the country, but all other people have been arrested and catched, which means even those people who are very close to most influential person, Zelensky, are not out of the responsibility if they are doing something wrong, which we cannot say that it works in Slovakia, for instance. Yeah, and this paradox. If Fico is criticizing now Ukraine, that Ukraine is corrupted country, but in Ukraine, law enforcement institutions and investigation institutions are independent. They're fighting against corruption, which means I think in Ukraine, regarding corruption situation was improved significantly, and in broader perspective, Ukraine is able, even in these very, very difficult circumstances of the war, economy is working very well. Of course, also thanks to the support, Western support, by loans, by grants, but is working relatively very well, despite of these attacks against energy infrastructure and all war circumstances which is in Ukraine. Which means, finally, if it will be possible to have for Ukraine some kind of speeding procedures to speeding up Ukrainian membership in the European Union, it could be very, very well and very welcomed, and I will surely support this, because they need, they in this very difficult situation regarding war, it is very important for them to have some kind of anchor and some kind of positive goal which is achievable even now in foreseeing future.
When it comes to the Ukrainian currency, the hryvnia, it has developed dramatically during the crises of the last 15 years, especially now during the war. Do you recommend, like for example, Moldova has now stabilized its currency towards the euro, and also most of the countries of the Balkans, with exemption of Albania, have a fixed exchange rate towards the euro now? Do you recommend a similar policy, or what's your take on the Ukrainian hryvnia's future?
But Ukraine doesn't have fixed system. They have managed floating regarding currency system. And currency, currency stability and currency development is good indicator of the responsible and reasonable economic policy. And it is currency stability, relative stability, of course, is good evidence that Ukraine is doing good responsible economic policy, and that National Bank is really independent and professional.
Let me ask you about the net benefit effect of Ukraine's EU membership. Do you think it will be a plus, or it will be a very expensive membership for the European Union in terms of long-term value generation, when given Ukraine's immense resources and the great capacity of its people?
I'm a strong supporter of integration, and I am deeply convinced that integration is a win-win situation. That means, and this is not theory, we have a lot of evidences, factual evidences, that, for instance, enlargement, which happened already, was beneficial not only for the new member countries, but also for the old member countries. And you are from Austria, you have to know, and you know that how beneficial it was for Austria, and for instance also regions in Austria, eastern regions in Austria, which have been before which have been neighboring the Iron Curtain, how have been developed these regions after Slovakia, Czech Republic, Hungary entered European Union, which means I am deeply convinced that in Ukrainian case it will be the same, that it will be win-win, beneficial for both parts. And of course it doesn't mean that for everybody, because of course for part of business and part of society it could have also additional costs, but overall picture is surely and will be surely win-win.
You're talking about Austria. Austria, of course, a neighbor of Slovakia, and we have immensely benefited from this integration and the membership of Ukraine, also membership of Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic in the European Union. But still, at the moment, we are staying neutral in Austria. We don't deliver any weapons. We don't bring, we have almost no bilateral financial support for Ukraine, and we are very anti-solidarity in terms of security and defense. And still we depend on the Slovaks and the Hungarians or the Ukrainians to defend us in terms of military, because we are almost underspending not even 1% of our GDP for defense. How fair do you think is Austrian neutrality? And as a personality who's led your own country into NATO, do you think it's also time for Austria to join NATO, similar like Sweden or Finland have done courageously? And now supplying, in the case of Sweden, they're supplying 7 billion euros of weapons towards Ukraine, while Austria is doing zero for Ukraine.
I don't want to comment Austrian politics and Austrian situation, but my personal view is that of course it could be finally much better for everybody if Austria has clear position, also in war with Ukraine and also in connection with the, let's say, ability to protect itself.
You don't want to mention a clear yes to Austria joining NATO, which I regret, but nevertheless I respect. Mr. Miklos, dear Ivan, Slovakia has not recognized the Republic of Kosovo, despite a lot of efforts of Kosovo to make friends and build bridges towards the Slovak Republic. Why exactly is the Slovakian Republic resisting this European policy? Because most of the European countries have recognized the Republic of Kosovo, and Serbia to this day is still a very, very problematic country when it comes to Ukraine. And also Mr. Putin is the best popular politician in Serbia, according to recent polls, and they are not joining the EU sanctions, and they are really very much far away from any kind of decent European compliance towards our common policy. So why is that in case of Slovakia that you have not recognized the Republic of Kosovo?
You correctly said that not only Slovakia, there is a group of countries, I think Spain and maybe two more countries didn't recognize Kosovo. And I agree with this decision not to recognize Kosovo. And by the way, it was decision of the Dzurindas government that we didn't recognize, and Fico is just continuing in this. Mainly because it is matter of principle. Because if we are saying that it is unacceptable to change borders by force, then Kosovo in principle was the first case. Kosovo was part of Yugoslavia. And then, and part of Serbia, yeah? And Serbia part of Yugoslavia. Which means in this regard, and you are right that Serbia is problematic country regarding support of Russia. They have long historical ties with Russia and so on and so on. But it is the matter of principle. And this matter of principles is also very important because it creates precedent. And if we are criticizing other countries, if they are doing this like Russia in Ukraine, then we could be principled in this regard, because then of course all critics are using this and misusing it. They are saying it is double standard. If you are accepting something against Serbia, but they are not accepting if it is regarding Ukraine. which means I think it was mistake. I of course know all this argumentation because of Srebrenica, because of war crimes and so on, but still it is very dangerous precedent.
There was recently the case of the Slovak Security Council advisor, Mr. Lajčák, who had to resign because he was implicated in the Epstein affair. So do you welcome this kind of resignation? Do you think there will be more revelation in terms of Slovakia in the Epstein papers? Or what's your take on that one?
Of course, that it was a correct step to resign. Of course, that it is scandal. But even if there will be something more in Slovakia, I don't think because Fico is saying that it was nothing. And if you look at what happened, what are now, for instance, political consequences against Starmer, who was not directly involved in this scandal, just because he appointed Mandelson to ambassador in US, who was involved in the scandal. You can see that in normally functioning countries, these political consequences, not against Lajčák. Lajčák is not important figure there, but against Fico himself, because Lajčák, among other things connected with the girls, was communicating with Epstein about arranging meeting between Fico and Bannon. And they explicitly have been discussing that Bannon is creating some kind of group of politicians which want undermine unity of European Union and the European values system, which means this is politically something which is connected not only with Lajčák but also with Fico. And despite of Fico's, let's say, closer and bigger involvement in this as Starmer, you can see difference how it is, how are political consequences in Slovakia and in the UK.
Alone this scandal would be enough for Mr. Fico to resign and to call for early elections and clean up the mess.
Fico will not resign in any, I cannot imagine what kind of scandal it could happen for Fico's resignation. Yeah. Unfortunately, still political culture in Slovakia is not such that it could happen.
I wish that Slovakia will return to the reform and to the pro-European and pro-Ukrainian camp, and that it will be the reform motor of Central Europe, which it has been under your leadership.
Thank you.
I want to give you the opportunity, one last sentence, maybe for the European leaders assembled now in Brussels, and they have all the same difficult decisions ahead of them on the agenda on Thursday and Friday, and you have been in that position of power. What do you advise them when they tackle that? What kind of message you want to leave them?
Just do it. Just do it. Just do everything what is necessary to do, despite of, let's say, political risk connected with this.
Thanks a lot. This was my podcast with Ivan Miklos, the father of the flat tax, the man who has transformed Slovakia, and his reforms, your reforms, have led to this tremendous success in Romania, in Poland, in many of the Central and Eastern European countries, where your economic leadership was copied later with the flat tax in Romania, Bulgaria, in Albania, in Macedonia, Kosovo, and you're really a hero for the tax reform movement. Thanks a lot that you took time. Thanks for leading your country into EU and NATO and the Euro. This is really the role model. I don't agree with your Kosovo policy, but some disagreements make the podcast interesting. And please be nice to my friends in Kosovo. And nevertheless, I want to thank you for your tremendous effort for Ukraine and for your clear yes for Ukraine joining the European Union and hopefully NATO and the Euro as well later, built on the Slovak reform model. This is the way we have to reform countries. Mr. Ivan Miklos, I want to thank you very much for your time and for this podcast. and all the best in the future for Slovakia, hopefully returning on the reform path.
Thank you, Ginter, and all the best. Bye.
I will stop.